Hey everyone, it's Captain Potato and I'm back with another raid boss ranking video. This time I'm taking a look at our 7th tier of raiding and the 1st tier of Wrath of the Lich King's expansion. This tier contained 3 raids: Nax Ramus, Obsidian Sanctum, and Eye of Eternity. And while Eye of Eternity is not a tier raid, it was a very important part of tier 7 and a very difficult raid on its own, so I felt like it very much deserved to be on this list. This raid tier is pretty unique among raid tiers, as a large amount of the core mechanics in these bosses are magic oriented, meaning interruption and absorption had a big part to play here. I am ranking these bosses based on their difficulty, and much like the Ulduar video, I'm looking at their 10 and 25 man encounters, though this time I will be far more focused on the 25 man versions, as they in my opinion were far more challenging than their 10 man counterparts, unlike in Ulduar, which I felt was far more balanced. This is my opinion from my own experiences, but that doesn't mean I don't want to know how you felt about these bosses as well. Drop your rankings in the comments below, I'm always down to check them out. Well, let's get this started with the easiest encounter at number 18.
Rise, my soldiers! Rise and fight once more!
Starting our list off at number 18 is Noth the Plague Bringer, or as I like to call him, Noth the Loot Dropper. This is going to be my first really edgy pick because I'm sure a lot of people are expecting other bosses to be here, but I have to say we never struggled with this guy, and mechanically he is by far the easiest to understand and defeat. Noth's big go-to mechanic is a curse he puts on the raid that, if not removed, does massive damage and will easily raid wipe you, if not handled with care. Yeah, too bad decursing is pretty simple and even mages could do this, meaning there usually was more than enough decursing to go around for your core. He also had an add phase, but the skeletons are easily tanked and bursted down, leaving Noth himself very alone and very dead.
Kneel before me, worm!
Coming up next is Grand Widow Fairlina. Yet another controversial pick. I wouldn't be surprised to hear about people struggling with this boss, but yet we really didn't. Grand Widow does have a few AoE abilities that can be a pain and must be healed through, but they aren't constants, meaning you have plenty of time to heal her poison bolts and move on. Her Rain of Fire is completely avoidable, meaning a lot of this fight is tank damage. The central focus of this boss is that every now and then she'll enrage, meaning you have to kill off one of her partnering adds to cancel the effect. Yeah, Blizzard didn't actually scale her damage too well compared to her 40-man counterpart, and a lot of guilds just AoE'd the adds down right at the start of the encounter and power healed through her enrage. Mama indeed got knocked out on this one.
Kel'Thuzad make Patchwork his avatar of war.
Up next is big ol' Patchwork himself. Easily one of WoW's earlier examples of a tank and spank boss, Patch didn't age too well compared to his original 40-man version. His one and only ability that you worry about is his Hateful Strikes, a saber lash-like effect that does damage to a target based on their threat level and maximum health, generally resulting in the tank holding the boss while the off-tank took the Hateful Strikes. Naturally, this is a bit of a healer-focused fight as the damage he deals is quite large, but with the lack of damage being dealt to the raid, it's not really that challenging either. One issue a lot of people had with this encounter was damage pulling too much threat and eating Hatefuls, but luckily we never saw this problem. He does frenzy at lower health, making the healers have to work just a bit harder, and he can enrage if you don't have the DPS for the job, but nonetheless a tank and spank that just got spanked.
Welcome to my parlor.
Number 15 goes to Anub Rakan. Anub is definitely more interesting than our previous bosses, as he can kill you far quicker if your heals and tank aren't up for the task. Anub has several abilities that you have to focus on, though they haven't really scaled too well in the newer versions of Nax. He has adds that must be dealt with, as well as an impale set of spikes that must be avoided or healed through. Most of these mechanics are easy enough to manage though, but his Locust Swarm is the one that you have to actually worry about. and it can be the deciding factor on if your raid will have success against this oversized Nerubian. Once every 2 minutes or so, he will cast Locust Swarm, which surrounds him in, well, locusts, in a large area of the arena, silencing and damaging anyone in the aura. This seems rather nasty in nature, but the arena is more than large enough to avoid the attack and kite him safely without dying. More challenging than the bosses that came before Anu, but still not quite good enough. Coming up next is Maxina. Maxina, much like a noob, has a decent variety of abilities to pay attention for, some more annoying than others. She will periodically web players against the far wall who must be broken out, as well as apply a healing reduction poison that must be dispelled. She doesn't hit too hard, though she does have a stun that will leave your tank idle to her attacks. This wouldn't be such a big problem if she didn't frenzy at low health, having a large damage and attack speed buff added to her. With the stun and healing reduction poison going out often, this can be very dangerous as a combo to overlook. You will be left gimped to this giant spider's attacks. Most cores struggling with this boss usually got her right before 30% and then transitioned her immediately after her last web stun, allowing them plenty of time to burst her down before the next stun. Not hard, but we are starting to get somewhere nonetheless. We are at number 13, and it's Lotheb. A boss from Vanilla Nax that used to make me so nervous has sadly fallen pretty far from grace. Lotheb had his abilities reworked to pretty much suit the slightly more casual expectations that Blizzard had for World of Warcraft's future. Instead of limiting the raid to 1 heal on a timer, he now locks you out of healing at all for every 17 seconds and only gives you 3 seconds to heal before reapplying the lock on heals. This seems scary, and mixed with his stacking shadow damage, it really should be, but it isn't that bad. Holy Paladins gained the ability Beacon of Light this expansion, and it allowed them to greatly handle the tank's dropping life as well as assist with raid heals. And of course, other healers like Holy Priests also had quite a big variety of AoE healing to top off the raid. So naturally, the only real concern in this encounter was having the DPS to kill him before he did too much shadow damage. But once again, Blizzard didn't scale him too well, meaning that it wasn't that difficult to zerg him.
Such flammable little insects!
My next spot surprises me. Number 12 is Sartharian. I'm sure a lot of Wrath Raiders' jaws just dropped. Like, how could I put Sarth the Loot Pinata so high on this list? Well, looking back at him and his mechanics, Sarth was a pretty average difficulty boss, given a lot of things back then. First off, his typical dragon mechanics and limited space to position were kind of a pain, and second, and most importantly, lava waves. People suck at lava waves. Whether it was pugs or guild runs for tier gloves, people never failed to fail at lava waves. Like, you could call out both sides where they were coming from, it wouldn't really matter, people were still going to get hit by them. I remember fail meter going off like an alarm clock on this boss, and it was because people sucked so bad at this mechanic. That, topped off with bad latency connections and computers, really made this just a nasty encounter, unfortunately, despite how easy he actually is. While wiping was common, Sarth is still an average on the difficulty meter, and at the end of the day was still pretty simple in nature. Up next is Grobulus. Funny to see Vanilla Nax's arguably easiest boss surpass some of the competition, but nonetheless, here he is. Grob's big thing is poison. Like, everywhere. If your room doesn't look like a snot rag near the end, then your DPS need a solid nerf. Grobulus sprays poison on the tank like a cleave-like effect, meaning spanking his butt was the only way to go for your DPS. He does also inject a random player with a debuff that will fall off after a short amount of time, doing AoE damage, summoning an ooze, and worst of all, leaving a gas cloud behind that expands. The complicated concept here is that as time goes on, there would be more and more gas clouds, leaving you less and less room to maneuver through, meaning melee heavy comps struggled a lot with this encounter. Proper kiting techniques paired with good dropping of the AoE clouds made this fight a pretty easy win, but not without a little stress on your healers and DPS first.
The time for practice is over. Show me what you've learned.
At our number 10 spot is Instructor Xyrise. Instructor is one of those bosses that always made me nervous when doing him. When doing his 25-man encounter, multiple priests are needed to mind control his adds, who are then used to tank the boss, as Instructor hits way too hard for any tank to properly tank him, or at least for the time period. The big problem here is the expectation that a priest or multiple priests actually know how to tank. Lucky for them, it wasn't too hard, simply taunt and rotate your survival cooldown when you have threat, but despite how easy it is, people still made a lot of mistakes and there wasn't much room for them. If one of the adds went down, it could easily cause a nasty chain reaction leading to a wipe, making this encounter kind of a pain looking back at it.